I'm Tom Kennedy, and welcome to my biocast. Now, today we're going to talk about mitochondria. Now, it seems to me that, so many schools teach cellular respiration as part of their introductory to biology courses, and I think it's the bane of many students' existence trying to memorize all those steps to cellular respiration. And in those majors courses, you might even have to learn all those different chemical reactions of glycolysis in the Krebs cycle. And then, a few weeks later, after you learn it, we have a memory dump, and all we remember is something about mitochondria, and they're important. They're the powerhouse of the cell, and they make this stuff called ATP. And that's it. We forget about it from there on. But in reality, the mitochondria are way more than just simply the powerhouse of the cell. They do a lot for the cells and stuff you've probably never even thought about. So today we're going to come up with 5 reasons why the mitochondria are so important. First, and probably the most important to all of us, mitochondria made multicellular life possible. And in fact, we would not have eukaryotic cells, we wouldn't have plants, animals, or fungus if it weren't for the mitochondria inside of our cells making lots of ATP. If it weren't for mitochondria, life on this planet would still be consistent of nothing but prokaryotic cells. There would be no complex multicellular life. So that's kind of important if you ask me. Coming in at number 2, did you know that the mitochondria may be responsible, at least in part, for the origins of sexual reproduction? Now really quickly, sexual reproduction occurs when 2 cells combine 2 genomes to form one new individual. So most animals reproduce when you have a sperm and an egg meet. Each gamete carries a copy of a genome, and your offspring now has 2 copies of the genome. Now, sexual reproduction has baffled scientists for decades. And the reason why is, how would it get started? Because you have a distinct disadvantage against asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, if you're a bacteria, you just, whenever times are good, you just reproduce, go half yourself. But in sexual reproduction, you've got to combine these 2 genomes to form a new offspring. So why would you do that? Well, it turns out that the mitochondria can cause a lot of damage inside of the cell. They use oxygen, and that oxygen produces a lot of free radicals that likes to oxidize everything around it, from the membranes to the proteins and to the DNA. So if you're a mitochondria and you're living inside of a cell and you damage enough of the DNA, the cell dies, takes you with it. However, if you can have a second copy of that genome, if you happen to damage one gene, well, by having a second copy of the genome, now all of a sudden you have a gene that might work. So having 2 copies of a genome is kind of like an insurance policy against the damage you're causing to it. So that's how we think that sexual reproduction got started. Okay, even more surprising, mitochondria may be responsible for the origin of 2 sexes. Now, sexual reproduction has baffled scientists for a long time, because why would you reproduce sexually when you could just half yourself and reproduce asexually and you can do it at any point? But the 2 sexes, male and female, why would you do that? I mean, think about this. You're already at a disadvantage with sexual selection in terms of producing sheer numbers compared to something reproducing asexually. But if you now have 2 sexes, you've effectively cut in half the population of who you could reproduce with. So why would you do that? Well, it turns out that the mitochondria, you can always inherit them from your mom, at least most of the time. And what happens is, whenever you combine 2 cells into one, all right, you would get mitochondria from both cells, and they would be competing against each other inside the cell for resources. But mitochondria, what they do is, they reproduce asexually inside the cell. So if you get all your mitochondria from one parent, then all of those mitochondria, they are 100% related to each other, and they wouldn't be competing against foreign mitochondria for resources. So that is why we think that the origin of 2 sexes, the male and the female, was driven by the mitochondria. Number 4, mitochondria might be responsible for our aging, at least in part. Aging is complicated, and there's a lot of reasons why we age. But it turns out that a price we pay for having all that energy, thank you mitochondria for making our lives, our active lives possible, well, there's a price. And that price is mitochondria use oxygen, and that oxygen can create reactive oxygen species They're incredibly reactive. We call this ROSs, and you may have heard the term free radical. Well, these damage your cells, they damage your proteins, they damage your membranes, and they damage your DNA. And over time, we accumulate this oxidative stress, causing us to age. And that's part of the reason why we also have sexual reproduction as well, is to like give ourselves 2 copies of our DNA. Number 5 is mitochondria are responsible, at least in part, for something called programmed cell death, also known as apoptosis or apoptosis as it's commonly called. Did you know that every single cell in your body has a kill switch built into it? And if it receives the right signal, it will commit suicide. Well, it turns out to be a multicellular organism, that ability to kill yourself on command, apoptosis, programmed cell death, is really needed. So as we develop, early on in our development, we actually have webbed fingers, and those cells are programmed to die within the first trimester of our development. Also, each day, we lose almost 50 billion cells to programmed cell death. Those are the cells of our skin and our other linings of our body, and they have to make way for young cells that haven't been damaged by being exposed to the world around us. And also, apoptosis is very important for fighting diseases, including cancer. And in fact, some people consider cancer to be a failure of apoptosis in a cancer cell. And also, if we get viruses attacking us, then those cells can kill themselves and take out the virus with them to protect us. So programmed cell death, very important, and it's also kind of odd that it originates with the mitochondria, which was once an endosymbiont. Well, I hope you learned something today about mitochondria other than that they are the powerhouse of the cell. As you can tell, they're really important for our survival and our evolution.